Is that right? Yeah.
Well, good evening and welcome everyone. My name is Lori Wilson. I'm the Assembly member from Solano County. I represent the 11th District, and I also have the distinct pleasure and honor of chairing the Assembly Transportation Committee. So we're really excited to be here at Chico State University, which is, I was expecting like a big round of applause or something for that, because this is Chico. I know there's a few alumni and folks associated with it. And it's been said that it is truly one of the most beautiful campuses in the CSU system. I came here late in the evening. I didn't get to see its full beauty, but I did get to see some really cool stuff on my way in. Walking in, I could probably tell that when the sun is shining, that this campus is pretty amazing. And so I'm going to ask you not to let the Maritime Academy in my district, which has a beautiful view of the water, know that I said that about any other place in the state. And so I really have been looking forward to the opportunity to discuss our current transportation funding system and the approach we're taking in the legislature to ensure that our transportation funding system is fair, accountable, and affordable. And most importantly, that it supports the transportation and mobility needs of communities in every part of California. This is an extremely important conversation, and I'm so glad I get to be here with you. I recently have been doing a couple of town halls related to accessible transportation, or transit in particular. And one of the leaders in this space for seniors and disabled folks is that her view of transportation in California is every single person, no matter their ability, should be able to go where they want to go, when they want to get there. And so that is something that stuck with me this week as I was preparing to be here in Chico today. And so tonight, we're going to hear from the California Department of Transportation, the California Transportation Commission, and the Legislative Analyst's Office. But the main purpose of this gathering is that so we can hear from you. Here in Butte County, the majority of residents, about 84% of people, get around and get to work by driving their cars. Now, this is according to the data from the Butte County Association of Government. But statistics only tell us so much. We want to know more about how you travel throughout the community, how you understand, your thoughts on what could be done to make your commute and travels more efficient, more safe, and more enjoyable. And this is important to me as a legislator and just as a government leader. I had the opportunity to be a local leader in Suisun City for about 12 years before coming to the legislature. And I remember saying on the dais one time, and it stuck with me the rest of the time. It's my North Star, is that every single person has a right to a high quality of life. They have a right to define what it looks like for themselves, and my only job is to facilitate that. The only way I can know that is by being in spaces like here, hearing from you about how you define quality of life. And we all know that you can't have a high quality of life without a couple of things that are important to me: housing and transportation. Housing is like, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's at, the core of that, right? It's the foundation. But once I get you housed, transportation is everything else. It's how you move in and around your community. It's how you get to your job center, recreation center, or education center. It's how you get to healthcare. I'm a grandma, 2.5 years now. I'm excited about it. And so I always say transportation is how you get to grandma's house. Now, what's more important than that? And so hearing from you about how you move in and around your community is extremely important, and how you want to move in California, which is the fourth or fifth, depending on the day, largest economy in the world. And we need a transportation system that lives up to that. And so a few questions that I'm going to ask these questions now, and it's going to help guide our conversation later. But how would you prioritize improvements to the transportation system? What are your thoughts on the current funding system? What do you think we should be doing to ensure that our roads, our bridges, sidewalks, bike lanes, and transit systems are safe, well-maintained, and properly funded? So as you listen to the presentations today, think about that, because when we have our discussion later, we're going to center our conversation around those questions. And so this is the fourth in a series of town halls statewide to engage Californians in their communities in an inclusive, multi-year conversation to shape policy solutions that ensure transportation infrastructure improvements are funded over the long term in a way that is fair, for all Californians. In essence, a roadshow, pun intended, to gather transportation ideas and concerns and highlight the deep thinking and work that's underway. What was really important to me is that we didn't just have this conversation in Sacramento. A lot of times people feel like all the conversations are happening there and they can't make their way. So I really wanted to bring the conversation to our communities, and excited that this is the fourth of 6 conversations that we'll be having. And at the same time, I've been convening a series of legislative and informational hearings on this issue with the Assembly Transportation Committee to make sure we consider an array of perspectives and make informed, data-driven decisions. We've heard from experts from all over the country and key voices here in California. And why are we doing that? Because we're committed to getting this right. And your participation in this process is critical to our success. So thank you for being here this evening and for your active participation. Note, I'm telling you in advance that I'm thanking you for your active participation, because there is going to be time for that, and for your time and your energy. We know, especially now during the holiday seasons, there's a lot of places to be. There's a lot of things to do. There's a lot of distractions with family. And so the fact that you chose to be here tonight, it means the world to me. And also, this is an opportunity to connect and engage, because we also know during the holiday season, it could be the loneliest time for folks. So the fact that you're here engaging and supporting one another in this conversation feels really good. And so now I'm going to welcome our expert panel, and that will help to set the stage for our conversation at the end. I'm going to introduce them all. They have done this. Everyone, I believe, almost everyone has participated in several of these town halls. So once one finished, we're going to move right on to the next. And so I'm going to introduce them all, and then I'll come back up at the end to guide our discussion. And as a reminder, we're all adults here, so if you need to take a comfort break, because we're not stopping, you can take that comfort break. There are refreshments outside, drinks and cookies, of course, and the restrooms are straight through there, and you had a chance to go to them, and they're just being cleaned, so you're going to get a positive experience in this wonderful new building. But as you need to take a comfort break, you will not offend any panelists here. Go take your comfort break. And so with that, Keith Duncan is going to be joining us from the California Department of Transportation, Caltrans. He is the Division Chief of Budgets and will discuss the current transportation funding system. To dive further into local projects and funding priorities, we have Sergio Aceves. Am I saying it right? Great. He's the District Director for Caltrans District 3. Each time we've had the different district directors come and participate across the region. So excited that he's here tonight and helping us with this, making this happen. We're also joined by Justin Behrens, Deputy Director of Transportation Planning for the California Transportation Commission. He will discuss the needs of the current multimodal transportation system and the funding outlook. And last but not least, and Frank Jimenez from the Nonpartisan Legislative Analyst Office. He's going to discuss the different policy options for supporting transportation infrastructure investments. And one thing I always say about the Legislative Analyst Office, also known as LAO, they play a critical role in our policy discussions at the state legislature. They are nonpartisan. They work with both people across the aisle, and they're a voice to give us the data and research that we need to make our policy decisions. They call it like they see it. And it's a wonderful asset to have in the state of California. And I encourage you to go look at their website, the Legislative Analyst Office, and look at all the reports that they do and all the data that they do. Not only does it inform us in the legislature, but it really informs all of California and speaks through that lens. We're a diverse community, but the voice that they have is critical to ensure that that diversity is strong in California as we go forward. And so with that, I kick it off to Keith. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Wilson. Good evening, everybody. Happy Thursday. As mentioned, Keith Duncan, our Caltrans Budgets, and I get to kick it off with Funding 101, Transportation Funding 101. Yes, we're going to talk numbers. I'll make it somewhat entertaining. We don't want anyone to fall asleep too much. So as noted on the screen, from a state level, at least for the state highway system, we have two primary funding sources. You have federal funding, and we have our state funding. At the local level, you also have some local measure money in most of our areas throughout the state, but for today we're just going to concentrate on the federal and the state level. From a federal funding, We're primarily funded through the Federal Highway Trust Fund, funding that comes through us for the highway system as well as for our local streets and roads through the Federal Highway Administration, FHWA. From the Highway Trust Fund, there's three primary funding sources. Technically, there's two revenue sources, but there's three primary funding sources. There's first, you've got the excise taxes on both gas and diesel, the federal excise tax base. And there's also the third bullet there, federal truck and tire fees. The second item that you can see there is the federal general fund. Currently, well over 30% of the Highway Trust Fund has to be supplemented by the federal general fund. They're facing a similar revenue issue at the federal level as we are talking about, as Assemblymember Wilson is talking about, at the state level as well as for our local transportation system. How do we get additional revenue? What do we need to do? So at the federal level, they are starting to talk about what alternative revenue sources can be. So that's great. We're a little ahead in the game, so that's a good thing. But the feds do see that there's a gap when it comes to trying to make sure that we meet our nationwide transportation needs. At the state level, we have, as similar to the federal, we have excise taxes on both gas and diesel. We have sales tax on diesel usage. We have state commercial vehicle fees as well as registration-based, the TIF and the RIF. I'll expand on those acronyms. I use too many of them. All right. When it comes to our primary revenues, specifically for the state, we have our gasoline excise tax rate. Excise tax rate for gas is 79.6 cents per gallon. You can see the breakdown between the federal and the state level. And then we have our diesel excise tax. It's at 71 cents per gallon. Again, on the screen, you can see the breakdown between state and federal excise tax break. When it comes to fuel, gas and diesel excise tax, the state retains about 63% of that revenue. And that's invested for that state highway system, and about 37% goes to the locals, cities, counties, regions, for local transportation systems. Also for diesel, for those of us in the room that might drive a diesel, you also pay sales tax. That sales tax revenue is primarily for transit and rail. That goes through Caltrans and through the State Controller's Office for direct apportionment through the State Transit Assistance, Transit Intercity Rail Program, and other related programs. So it is going to transportation, but specifically for transit and rail. We also have our commercial vehicle weight fees, those that may drive pickup trucks or commercial trucks that's based on your payload. That revenue specifically goes to past bond debt. Many of you may remember Proposition 1A, Proposition 1B back in the early 2000s. That's primarily going to pay off that bond debt. The other two items are, thanks to the passage of Senate Bill 1 back in 2017, we have both our transportation improvement fee and our road improvement fee. The transportation improvement fee is a fee paid by all vehicle owners, whether it's a gas or diesel powered as well as a zero emission vehicle or an alternative fuel vehicle. That fee is there's 5 different levels, and it's based on the value of your vehicle. And then you've got your zero emission vehicle fee, or commonly referred to as a road improvement fee. That's paid by just if you're a zero emission vehicle driver, model year 2020 or newer. So if you happen to be driving a 2019 or older, you're not paying it. It is also important to note when it comes to the RIF and the TIF, the transportation improvement fee and the road improvement fee, that revenue is split 50-50, with 50% going to the state for the highway system and 50% going to locals, counties, cities, regions. So if you're the state and do you want more RIF and TIF registration based, or do you want more gas? You want more gas because we get roughly 63%. If you're local, do you want more RIF and TIF, or do you want more gas? You want more RIF and TIF registration based because you get 50%. That's part of it. We kind of go back and forth with the idea, but a lot of this is based on statute. That's why we appreciate engagement by the legislature when it comes to identifying, when it comes to a new revenue or different revenue, how it's going to be distributed. Because obviously, as my friends here, Justin as well as Frank in a little bit, talking about, it's not just the state highway system that there's a need, it's the locals as well. And then just kind of looking at it, almost 3/4 of our transportation revenue is dependent on fuel. So as we use less fuel, you see bigger hit when it comes to both our state and local transportation revenue availability. So with that, I now get the great opportunity to turn it over to my friend Sergio, our district director with District 3, to share some of the local benefits, what we've been able to accomplish with our revenue.
Thank you, Keith. Good evening, everybody. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and thank Chair Wilson for inviting me and highlight a little bit about the local aspect. I'll start with District 3. As you can see, District 3 is comprised of 11 counties in the northern Sacramento Valley and northern Sierra counties. As a fun fact, District 3 has the most counties in number of any other of the 12 districts in Caltrans. We maintain and operate over 4,300 lane miles, and again, have a very robust operations both in the valley as well as I would say the largest snow operations in the state, because we have Interstate 80 and US 50, which are major thoroughfares that cross the Sierras. And so a lot of staffing, a lot of work that takes place to keep those thoroughfares open. Since the passage of SB 1, we've done a lot. The Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017 created the Road Maintenance and Rehabilitation Act program to address deferred maintenance on the state highway and the local street and road systems, as Keith mentioned. SB 1 programs such as the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, Solutions for Congested Corridor Program, Local Partnership Program, and Active Transportation Program provide solutions for congestion, economic trade, and overall quality of life. It's really important, by the way, and I'm speaking as a district director, that the projects we put out serve the needs of the community. That's really important for us. So these programs really allow us to do that. In District 3, we've put out over 360 projects worth over $1.8 billion since the inception of SB 1. So it's been a tremendous boom for our district, a tremendous boom for our partners and our communities here in the district. Just a few local examples that I want to highlight that we've done here locally. One is let me see, yeah, I'm on the right slide. The State Route 162 Oroville Pavement Rehabilitation Project. This roadway improvement project is from the Feather River Bridge to the Foothill Boulevard in the city of Oroville. It will rehabilitate pavement, upgrade drainage systems, improve curb ramps and sidewalks to bring them up to Americans with Disability Act standards, and modify and or replace some of the traffic signals and lighting. This project is currently scheduled to go to construction in May of 2026. We have open bids, and we were very close to that $25 million number that you see there. Again, funded from the shop, and the SB 1 funds allowed us to put this project forward that will really enhance the preservation of the state highway right through that community, as well as provide those multimodal features for pedestrians. Next project that I want to highlight is right here in town in Chico. It's the State Route 32 Pavement and Rehabilitation Project. This is a roadway improvement project that goes from Muir Avenue to State Route 99 in Chico. It will rehabilitate pavement, upgrade drainage systems, improve curb ramps and sidewalks, also to bring them up to ADA standards, or Americans with Disability Act standards, as well as install traffic signals and lighting. This project is already in construction, and as we were driving in this afternoon, I was very pleased to see the new pavement and being able to drive on it. It's scheduled to be completed in this coming May of 2026. And then I also want to talk, there you go. I also want to talk about a series of projects and want to highlight the tremendous partnership here in the district level that we have with our friends at BCAC. I know you're sitting back there, John, so good to see you. But in regards to being able to move a lot of projects forward, these were a series of projects that go from Oroville down to Marysville on the State Route 70 corridor. This corridor, just as a matter of background, had experienced a higher than average collision rate. And with this upgraded facility, we have improved safety, improved the connectivity between Butte County and the greater Sacramento Valley, and supported the growing economic sectors in Oroville and the surrounding areas. These projects, it was a series of projects that were funded from the shop as well as local funds. Again, tremendous partnership with Butte County Association of Government. The projects that you see here went to construction between 2019 and just finished recently in 2024. We are going to be starting a project this coming summer, which is the last project, number 7 there that you see on the screen in Marysville. It's called the Binney Junction Project, and we're getting very close to moving that project forward. But we're very proud, especially of the safety benefits, the freight benefits that these series of projects provided for this very important corridor for this community. And then I also want to highlight how the 70 corridor project really goes beyond just Oroville to Marysville. It really spans and makes the connection better between two very important urban areas here in District 3, which is the city of Chico, with over 100,000 in population, down to the city of Sacramento. A series of projects really started between Marysville South back in the 90s. Between Sacramento, starting 70, just north of Sacramento, all the way up to Chico, Caltrans has invested over $900 million on this 70 corridor on multiple projects between Sacramento and Chico to enhance safety, traffic operation improvements, and the final segment of that 70 corridor upgrade is scheduled to start, like I said, in the summer of 2026, which is the Binney Junction project right in the heart of Marysville. But we're very proud of the partnerships from Marysville North that we've worked with BCAG on this, Butte County Association of Government, and to the south end between Marysville and Sacramento with SACOG, Sacramento Council of Governments. Won't go with over the figures that you see there, but there's been a tremendous amount of investment that we've put on this corridor that's so important for us. Last but not least, I do want to highlight to everybody, and this is not just a District 3 thing, but this is a Caltrans overall thing in regards to transparency. I would like to learn, if you would like to learn more about these projects, and all of the statewide efforts that we're doing, you are more than welcome to visit the buildcalifornia.gov website. This Build California website increases public visibility and accountability for Caltrans projects. You can get all the information you need on these projects. Communities, legislators, and local partners can now easily see project milestones, locations, and spending, raising expectations for on-time delivery and transparent decision-making. With that, I will turn it over to Justin. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. Let's see if I got this right. There we go. Well, good evening, everyone. Nice to be here with you all. My name is Justin Behrens. I'm the Deputy Director for Legislation and Finance at the California Transportation Commission. And I'm going to start my presentation with some information about what the Commission does and how we partner with our sister agency, Caltrans. Caltrans is the owner-operator of the state highway system, so they plan and implement projects, as was described by Keith and Sergio in their presentations. And the Commission is a separate state agency that oversees state transportation funding programs, allocates funding to multimodal projects around the state, and also advises the California legislature and the administration on transportation policy. We're also fortunate to have Assemblywoman Wilson as an ex officio member on our commission, so we get to see her every couple months when we meet. The commission allocates funding through programs that are established in statute to both Caltrans, as well as cities, counties, regional agencies, and transit operators to help them implement their priority projects. Given our role to help fund projects, we're very interested in making sure that the transportation funding system in California is fair, accountable, and sustainable. All right. So my role today will be to share findings and recommendations from the Commission's recently completed 2025 State and Local Transportation System Needs Assessment, which looked at transportation infrastructure needs statewide and the revenues projected to be available for those needs over the next 10 years. My hope is that after this part of the panel, you'll get a sense of the magnitude of transportation needs statewide and better understand how those needs are outpacing our available revenues. First, I'll provide a short overview of the needs assessment. Then I'll go over our findings, and finally I'll touch on our recommendations. Great. So the needs assessment was prepared pursuant to Senate Bill 1121, and we're required to update it every 5 years. And our first report, the 2025 needs assessment, identifies California's multimodal transportation needs, the revenue available to cover those needs, and analyzes the difference between our needs and available revenue through the year 2035. The needs assessment used surveys and reviews of local, regional, and state plans, as well as existing condition assessments to estimate our multimodal needs. And on the revenue side, we worked closely with regional transportation agencies and Caltrans to estimate available revenues for that 10-year period. And here is a summary of what we found. I know that's kind of tough to read on the screen. On the left side, you will see that over the 10-year period, just under $757 billion of needs were identified across these facility categories. And on the right side, we have a total of $572 billion in anticipated revenue. And this has been adjusted down to $541 billion to reflect an estimated $31 billion reduction in gas tax revenues due to declining fuel consumption. Like Keith described, we're heavily reliant on fuel tax revenues, and so while driving isn't really going down, cars are more fuel efficient, and there's more EVs and hybrids on the road, and people are buying less gas, which means there's less revenue from those fuel sources. So if you look on here, you can... Oh, yeah. Is that better? Better? Yeah. All right. I apologize. I can start from 0. Is that better? Okay. So you can see on the types of needs here, you have transit and rail, you have the state highway system, you have local streets and roads, active transportation, climate adaptation, all the different things that we as the state are prioritizing and investing in. Here's a simplified version of that summary. Oops. One more. There we go. So our 10-year shortfall is just over $215 billion. In other words, our needs are expected to outpace our revenue sources to the tune of over $20 billion per year based on our current funding system. In 2017, California passed Senate Bill 1, which Keith and Sergio described, and the voters upheld it in the next year in a referendum. And since then, we as a state have been working hard to invest in critical transportation infrastructure with the Fix It First framework. And working together with our state and local partners, we've collectively achieved some tremendous successes in delivering projects like Sergio described, and as we heard from Caltrans. And also thanks to that funding and work statewide, the California State Auditor recently removed the state's transportation infrastructure from its high-risk list of issues after 16 years, which is in recognition of the progress that California has made in rebuilding and upgrading the state transportation system. However, even when Senate Bill 1 was passed, it was very clear that it was not intended to meet all of California's state and local transportation needs. And as illustrated on this slide, the needs assessment is projecting a decline in fuel tax revenues that fund transportation improvements throughout the state. The needs assessment also indicates that relying on fuel taxes to fund transportation infrastructure is not sustainable. To meet our state goals of safety, equity, climate action, and economic prosperity, the transportation funding system in California must be fair, accountable, and sustainable into the future. And as part of the needs assessment, we worked with stakeholders through a public process to identify some initial recommendations on how to achieve this. So as part of the recommendations process, and then maybe I just turned it off, which would be unfortunate. There we go. Great. As part of the recommendations process, we had developed a set of first principles of co-equal importance that are illustrated on this slide and reflect the goals that transportation infrastructure must support. And these are based on existing state goals and were further developed with stakeholder input. And as the legislature considers solutions and mechanisms for sustainable transportation funding, these principles can inform that discussion. I will say that the findings of our needs assessment are available on the Commission's website, so if you weren't able to zoom in and see those charts, they are available online. And as we get to our actual recommendations, given the shortfall that I described and the impact to critical infrastructure, the needs assessment recommends a phased implementation of a sustainable funding mechanism to fully replace the gas tax. And this could take on different forms, and potential funding mechanisms will be discussed by Frank later on in this panel. But an important goal of this in this process is to figure out how to stop the near-term loss of funding due to declining fuel consumption, and also to determine a long-term solution to modernize how we fund transportation infrastructure. The state is looking to the legislature and all levels of government, as well as the community, industry, and academia, to consider these options that are available and help identify the most sustainable, transparent, and equitable solution to this issue. And although we have quite the challenge in front of us, now is the time to start discussing what a potential solution might be. So this wraps up my presentation, and happy to answer questions when appropriate. One more. Sorry, Frank. There we go. I think we're going to circle back to that during Frank's presentation.
So good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Is my mic working? You can? All right. I'll continue as is. All right. So, good evening, everyone. Frank Jimenez with the Legislative Analyst Office. As CTC pointed out, the state is facing a long-term funding issue when it comes to transportation sources. My presentation will discuss options in front of the state in terms of addressing long-term funding gaps. Before I get into my presentation, I'll describe a little bit about the LAO, but Chair Wilson did such a good job, I can basically skip this slide. But we are a nonpartisan office within the state legislature. We work for both houses and both parties. We're mostly known for our work during the budget process, but we do work on independent reports throughout the year. So, a quick overview of my presentation. So, I'll talk a little bit about a report that we released in 2023, and it's kind of the basis for the presentation that I'm giving today. I'll talk about the options that we identify in our report to address the state's long-term funding issues in the transportation space. In the report, we look at 2 potential new transportation-related charges that the state could consider implementing, and I'll talk about what those could be and explain them in a little bit more detail. Look at key criteria the legislature could use at weighing its various options, and then we'll go through some of the trade-offs of the various options based on those criteria. So in 2023, our office released a report looking at the future of transportation funding, and similar to CTC, we found that revenues are projected to decline over the long run due to increasing fuel efficiency gains in internal combustion engine vehicles and the increasing adoption of zero-emission vehicles. In the report, we discuss impacts to state transportation programs, and we also weigh the various trade-offs of major options in front of the legislature to solve this long-term funding gap. In our report, we identify 4 key areas in which the legislature could seek options both in the short term or in the long run as well. They boil down to increasing existing fuel taxes and vehicle fees, so increasing the taxes and fees that Mr. Duncan described, shifting transportation costs to other fund sources, whether that's the general fund or other special funds such as the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. The state can reduce and reprioritize transportation spending. I won't spend a lot of time on this particular option, but essentially, as revenues decline, the state could shift around its current dollars to its highest priorities, such as switching from capital to maintenance. The state could also look at generating additional revenues from new transportation-related charges. 2 that are commonly brought up and that we dive into more detail in our report are taxes on alternative fuels and a road charge, which I'll describe very briefly on the next slide. So taxes on alternative fuels would be a tax on the consumption of electricity or hydrogen that's used to power zero-emission vehicles, so very similar to our current gasoline and diesel tax system, but for alternative fuels. The state could also look at implementing a road charge, which it has continued to study over the past decade, but this would essentially be a per-mile charge on all vehicles regardless of fuel source, so charging individuals not based on how much of a type of fuel they consume, but the number of miles they drive on the state's transportation system. In our report, we look at 4 key criteria that the legislature could use to weigh the various options. The first one being the user pays principle. So looking at, are the costs of maintaining and improving the state's transportation system paid by those who use and benefit from the system? This has been a core principle of how the state has funded its transportation system. It's not something that the state needs to abide by all the time, but it is a core principle, and it's something that the state should understand as it weighs its various options. Are we deviating or staying with this core principle that the state has historically relied on? Equity, how do various options have distributional impacts by various groups, whether by income or geography? Ease of implementation, so looking at if there's any significant state cost to a particular option, and how complicated would this option be both for the state to administer and also for the public who has to interact with this option. Revenue stability and sustainability, are any additional revenues that we generate stable over the long run, and do they solve the core issue that the state is facing, and that's declining fuel tax revenues due to increasing fuel efficiency amongst conventional vehicles and zero-emission vehicle adoption. So this is the wonky part of my presentation where we go through all of the options and how they more or less align or don't align with the various key criteria that we lay out. It's an important part of opening up discussion and hearing from you all on how you think about these various options. So I won't spend too much time on each of them, but just very quickly, just go over them at a high level. So we could look at increasing existing fuel taxes. This generally aligns with the user pays principle. The more you drive, the more gasoline or diesel you consume. However, there's been a departure over this in recent decades. Two people could be driving the same number of miles and doing the same wear and tear on the highway system, but paying different amounts in gas tax just because vehicles across the state have different levels of fuel efficiency. From an equity perspective, anytime you increase a flat tax or charge on an individual and it's flat regardless of income, there's going to be larger equity impacts. So this definitely relates to the fuel taxes that the state currently charges and increasing them. Ease of implementation, it'd be relatively easy for the state to implement this because we already have this collection system in place and people are very accustomed to paying at the pump. Revenue stability and sustainability. These revenue gains, if we increase fuel taxes, would be very short-lived. We would have immediate revenue increases, but as fuel efficiency increases and zero-emission vehicles become more prevalent, those gains would decline over time. We can also look at increasing existing vehicle fees. This generally aligns with the user pays principle, but is not perfectly aligned. It's a flat fee charged to all vehicles, so it doesn't vary based on how much you drive, so you're not fully aligned with this principle, but you are charging vehicle owners who likely use and benefit the state's transportation system. From an equity perspective, you have similar issues you run into with increasing fuel taxes. However, some vehicle fees are tiered, so you could implement them in a way where lower income households are paying minimal or no increases. Ease of implementation, very similar to increasing fuel taxes. We already have collection systems in place and individuals are very accustomed to paying their annual registration. Revenue stability and sustainability, any additional revenues that we would gain from this option would be sustainable over the long run, but it's not solving the core issue that the state is facing, and that's declining fuel taxes. So as those revenues continue to diminish over the long run, the state would look to have to increasing vehicle fees higher each year to keep pace with that decline. So it's not a long-term solution, but could be part of a larger portfolio of solutions. Shifting transportation costs to other fund sources. The more we get away from fuel taxes and vehicle fees, the less we're aligning with the user pays principle. Equity and ease of implementation, this would depend a lot on what the ultimate mechanism is to bring in new revenues. So if we're taking additional funding from the general fund, those are dollars we aren't spending in other policy areas. If we're increasing general fund revenues to support transportation, the equity implications really depend on how you're ultimately implementing those increases. And then revenue stability and sustainability, kind of the same thing that we saw with the increasing vehicle fees. It's not solving the core issue at hand, declining fuel tax revenue. So as those continue to decline, we'd have to keep shifting additional dollars from other resources. Implementing alternative fuel taxes. This would generally align with the user pays principle as well, since the more electricity you use for your vehicle or hydrogen, the more miles you're probably going to drive. Ease of implementation. I think intuitively this option makes a lot of sense to people. If these vehicles are using electricity, let's just charge the electricity they use for their vehicles. However, there are some quirky implementation issues for this one in particular, because currently 80% of charging takes place at people's houses. So it'd be very cost prohibitive and difficult to implement some sort of system or mechanism in the house where it can tell the state how much electricity is being used to charge a vehicle versus being used for a general appliance. So that's an option that the state could consider, but there could be a large chunk of electricity that the state wouldn't be able to charge for that's related to driving. From an equity consideration, likely larger impacts to lower income households. And then if we're unable to charge on electricity used at home charging, can only do it at public charging stations, that disproportionately impacts renters who tend to be lower income on average. Revenue stability and sustainability. This only tackles one side of the coin for the issue that the state's facing. It tackles that zero-emission vehicle adoption side, but it doesn't tackle the fuel efficiency gains that we're seeing in conventional vehicles. So we'd still see fuel revenues decline on that side. So this isn't a full solution either in terms of a sustainable long-term solution. And then finally, last slide, implementing a road charge. This is directly tied to the user pays principle because we're charging a per mile fee. So it's not based on a proxy of how much of a particular fuel source you're using. It's based on number of miles driven. From an equity consideration, as with most taxes, larger impacts to lower income households. However, this could offset some of the disproportionate impacts we currently have under the existing fuel tax system. Ease of implementation, this is where this one differs a bit. This would require the state to implement a new system for collecting revenue from individuals, receiving the number of miles driven, and individuals interacting and potentially reporting miles driven in the system, so there'd be likely higher implementation cost. However, this issue directly solves the issue that the state is facing if we were to transition from a fuel tax system to a road charge system. It tackles both the fuel tax revenue declines due to increasing fuel efficiency and zero emission vehicle adoption because we're going away from consumption to miles driven. I know that was a lot of information, and thank you all for listening through it, and hopefully that kind of sparks the conversation that we'll have, but looking forward to answering any questions.
Can we give a round of applause to our presenters? So before we get into our back and forth discussion, I wanted to give an opportunity for you all to ask any clarifying questions on the presentation before we got into our discussion. And so I'll kick off a question, and then I'll give you in your mind of the kind of things we're looking at. And so this is for Keith at Caltrans, and you can answer this too, Sergio, if you want to. But as we start to see our revenue declines from the gas tax as more drivers switch to fuel efficient and zero emission vehicles, we get questions a lot about fixing potholes and all those kind of things. And so I wanted to, if you could speak to like the difference between the revenue you get, and who's in charge of like fixing potholes and things of that nature.
Well, thank you very much. That's not much of a softball question.
No.
So when it comes
to, it's about the local infrastructure needs, like, and what's happening at the state. And I know you all deal a bit with that as a district director, so I want to give you an opportunity to weigh in on that.
I'll definitely turn it over to Sergio here in a minute. But when it comes to the state's share of both the fuel excise taxes as well as the registration-based fees, by statute, there are a certain percentage, roughly 60% of the funds do go to the SHOP, which is the State Highway Operation Protection Program. That's primarily for our capital projects. Those are the construction projects that you see on while you're driving the system and you see you're entering a construction zone. So by statute, it identifies how much funds are dedicated to that. The remaining funds are dedicated to maintaining and operating the system. That's where we have a lot of our Caltrans operations, where you get to see all the Caltrans trucks. That's where our maintenance crews are taking care of a lot of the potholes and litter cleanup. And that's where we get to allocate the funds to the district level to be able to handle much of those operations. So I don't know if you want to expand on some of the operations maintenance.
Yeah, I'll just add to it. In one of my prior roles in Caltrans, I was division chief of maintenance, and statewide, I'll just say it this way. When we preserve our state highway system, it's a three-tiered approach. Orange shirts on the field, which is maintenance, fixing the potholes, picking up that sign that got ran over. Light maintenance projects, what we call our highway maintenance projects. Those are thin blanket overlays, slurry seals, and so on and so forth. Last but not least is what Keith spoke about, which is SHOP, which are your more robust road reconstruction, more robust rehabilitation. We use all three in tandem to preserve our state highway system as best as we can, in the best possible way. And there is a clear delineation between what goes to SHOP and what goes to the highway maintenance program. I can tell you that highway maintenance and shirt maintenance budget overall is around $2.1 billion. You can correct me. $2.1 billion a year that goes statewide to just maintain the state highway system, not counting the SHOP projects. That's just orange shirts on the field, keeping those potholes filled.
And so not even counting the local roads at city and a county level?
That's separate, yes.
Okay. Seeing if there's any questions, I'll keep going. If there's no questions, go ahead. Okay, I'm going to come to you. I'm going to be like Oprah and go in the audience. I want you to use the microphone.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. I'm County Supervisor Todd Kimmelshoe, and my colleague is back here, Tammy Ritter, and our Assistant Director for our Public Works Department, Scott Hightower, is here. So these, first of all, a couple comments. Sergio, thank you for the work that Caltrans has done in this area. Highway 70, fantastic improvement. Yes, yeah. Highway 32 is going to be great. I know, coming through town. It's not great right now, but it will be great,
Absolutely.
I'm sure.
Yes.
And then 162 will also be wonderful. So thank you for that. One question to Keith is that all the funds that you had spoke about, can those be robbed by any other part of the state government? Or are those specifically for transportation and road issues?
Thanks to the efforts by the legislature in the 2010, around the 2010 timeline, it pretty much put a lockbox on that revenue. Fuel, excise tax revenue are protected by the Article 19 within the how it can be used within the state constitution, as well as much of what passed Senate Bill 1. So it is locked in for transportation needs for both the state and local
Wonderful.
system.
I'm glad to hear that. And another comment, and Scott can help me out if this is incorrect, but what we feel that this is a $100,000 population city, but much of our county is rural. And I do have to say that our rural roads are crumbling, and the source of our income for roads comes 100% from the state government. So we always say that for every $10 of need in Butte County, we get $1 from the state of California. So we have some real crumbling rural roads, which do and does provide, there's a lot of safety issues with those. So I'm just making you aware of that. And then finally, how are those funds that you collect allocated per county, by each county? Is it by population?
For when it comes to the SHOP, which is the primary rehab reconstruction effort when it comes to maintaining the highway system, it's based on asset management principles. So we do pavement condition surveys, bridge condition surveys. So there are certain aspects of the state, if we've got crumbling pavement based on the type of pavements, that we would invest based on that.
Okay, so it's not based on population or miles traveled on our roads or anything like that.
Right.
So,
the primary is based. We do have some reservations dedicated to safety, so reactive safety. If there's an immediate safety need, we're going to invest into that portion of the highway system because we want to make sure protecting its users. So there's different aspects. Sometimes there's reservation for emergencies. Unfortunately, we've seen a growing cost for there, so we have those reservations. But the primary basis for investment within our primary rehabilitation effort is on asset management.
And finally, I just want to say, good luck. All the proposals you had, wonderful. We don't care how you get the money, just get it and send it to us. As far as I'm concerned, I think, good luck in trying to figure that out, but any help would be greatly appreciated. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, not at all. Just to tag on to what Keith was saying, I think Keith's talking specifically about the state highway system improvements, but the funds that go to cities and counties, the formula for that is based on both population and the lane miles in the system. So if Butte County has X number of lane miles, that's part of the calculation for how much they receive from those funds that are reserved for local agencies.
Okay, thank you very much.
And just to add on something that Frank was talking about with all the different options that are available to us, is that's what these conversations about, are figuring out what is the option available to California. We do not believe it's going to be a silver bullet where we're going to pick one thing and that thing is going to work and solve our issues. And yay, sustainable gas tax or sustainable funding for transportation infrastructure forever. For California, we think it's going to be a multitude of options, even some that aren't listed to there. That is in particular as it relates to the options that he gave in comparison to the one way to fund is gas tax. But we think that there are multiple options. It's going to take time. It's going to be a multi-year effort because California is so big, is so diverse, but we have to figure this out because like I said at the beginning, this is how people move in and around a community, right? And so we have to get it right. And so, Frank, do you want to speak to the fact that there are those different options and how you all view from the LAO's office about what option the legislature should take or what's available to them, just in a broad sense?
Yeah, so in our report, we ultimately do not have a recommended option for the legislature to go forward with. Our report, we've identified this long-term issue that will slowly build over the coming years, and we've identified an issue, and now is the time to have the conversations with amongst the legislature, amongst the public, and ultimately deciding what that option looks like, whether it's single-pronged, multi-pronged, and how it can be implemented over the short run and long run.
But what I think you all have identified is that there is an issue.
Yeah.
And that we can't kick the can down the road, so to speak, too much longer. We've been having this conversation. I think when first I've identified it maybe 2014. And so it's been some time. We're going on now 11 years. We're beyond a decade in this conversation. And other states have done something. We had a informational hearing where we got to hear about what other states were doing. And other states that were behind us when we started having this conversation have leapfrogged us and got into it. And then I'll go over to you, Justin, just to say you had the needs assessment, and it talked about the gap, and then it talked about another $31.5, I think it was, $billion just related to fuel efficiency. Can you talk about how you all at the CTC, you're staffing the CTC, which I sit on as ex officio, but how do you then, with that gap, prioritize the needs?
Yeah, so the programs that we administer are all established in statute, and that statute lays out how those programs work, what types of projects they fund, and ultimately, if you don't have the resources that you need to fully fund all those programs, then it is hard to prioritize, and there are going to be trade-offs in projects that you can't fund if you don't have sufficient funding levels. So a lot of that is driven by decisions that the legislature has made in statute, and then we implement it. But at a certain point, you need the resources to sort of put into that funnel in order to have the projects come out at the other end of it.
Thank you. Back here, and then we'll go down here. Let me jump up there. I'll have you use the mic. Only I say that because somebody might be hard of hearing, and then they have to, then ask, and I don't want anybody to have to ask.
Totally fine. Thank you. Hi. So is this working? I'm already loud. Okay. You mentioned states that were behind us and then have since surpassed us in their solutions to these problems. Can you provide us with any, what are the similarities between those states and us, and then what are some of the notable differences between those states and us?
Yeah.
Can you tell us who they are, too?
Let me get my notes. But I will say, if you want more detail on that, we had the informational hearing, I think was in August. And we had all of the state representatives gave a presentation and very much detail. So if it's something, it's wonderful TV if you have nothing else to do over the holiday weekend, and you run out of streaming. As my husband says sometimes when I'm like on break, I'll just totally be on Netflix and everything, and there's just nothing left to watch. So if you have nothing else left to watch, you can watch that hearing. But we had, hold on, let me look. I have a few notes. So we had, where are we at? So 7 states have enacted kilowatt-hour taxes on public EV charging stations. So those are Iowa, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Utah, Georgia, and Montana. And so the rate structure and the administration of those vary by state. And so 11 states have implemented increased registration fees for EVs or hybrids. That is California. We do have that. It is much lower. We'll get into that conversation compared to what people pay if they're gas powered vehicles. Georgia, Indiana, Maryland, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Utah. Now, these fees often increase over time with inflation, but it's different in every state. And Delaware, Michigan, Montana, and Oklahoma also factor vehicle weight into into their fee calculations. One of the things that Frank talked about was that user pay model, where if you use the infrastructure, you pay for the infrastructure. And we all know that vehicles that weigh more have a definite impact greater than a lower weight vehicle on our infrastructure. And so they have the thing where they have to pay more since they're heavier. And so we have toll pricing, and it's in several states, of course, like Florida, Texas, ourselves, and where the rates are adjusted based on traffic lane type or distance travel. One of the things was Oregon. They launched the nation's first voluntary road user charge program using a GPS-enabled device. And Hawaii has a voluntary pilot offering. It's based on odometer or app-based reporting. And then Utah operates 100% opt-in program for EVs and hybrids using telematics. And so, and last but not least, but Virginia, they also have a voluntary system with odometer reporting and caps to address equity. So those are what some of the states are doing. Oregon also has an additional payroll tax that goes to support transit. It's like 0.01%. I think they were going through the legislature this past year to go to 0.02%. I don't know if that actually happened to help pay for transit operations. And there's another state, and there's two other states who are doing basically a delivery fee. As we know, we've now moved to, instead of going to the grocery store or going to Walmart or going to wherever, we usually now have it delivered to our house. So we're not using our own vehicles to do that. But those vehicles are coming, and they're usually EVs. So they're not paying into the system that are delivering it. And so there are two states who did enact a delivery fee for all non-perishable goods. So not your grocery store, but anything where you have taxable, you get a delivery fee to have it delivered to your house. And I think it was really small. It wasn't a lot of money. It generated a lot of money, but the actual per hit to the consumer was very small, as a way to make up for the fact that infrastructure is being used. You're not driving the miles, but there is something coming to you. And with those, they were split between local and state. So because the impact on local roads, so that helped fund local funding in those regards. Does that answer that question for you? Sounds good. We're going to go here and then up there and then over there.
I think you started to answer my question, but I was going to ask about road charges. And the first thing that struck me was the New Jersey Turnpike, having lived out there. I hope that's not what we're going to do. But you mentioned some of these odometer-based and, yeah, so maybe a little bit more about that. Yeah.
So some of them are app-based. So some of them are odometer-based where you do that. But, I can imagine in California, we talk a lot about privacy. I sit on that committee. and I've heard over the 3.5 years that I've served on that committee, people we're skittish about things like that. And then there's the app where you can use an app for it. There's one state, and I can't remember which one it is, but trust me, it's must-see TV. Go see the hearing in August. See, I'm pumping it up even better than it was. But, you can, they have it's a either or. So you can pay a flat rate, or you can say, hey, I can beat that number and pay a lower rate and go personal, but you'll never go above that cap rate. And so there's a state that does that, and that seems to work for them. I'm one of those people and I joke about this, and I do chair transportation joking about this, but if my car tells me it's going to take me 10 minutes to get there, I'm trying to figure out how to beat that number. And so I can imagine that that's appealing for folks who are like, oh, I don't want to pay the flat rate. I think I can beat that number. We had that on one of our pilots, and in January, are we doing the info hearing in January? February. We're having an info hearing coming up where we're going to talk about the pilots that California has done, because we've done 4. And one of those, someone who was participating in them, she was at our last hearing in Watsonville, I think it was, and she was talking about the fact that she thought that she could beat that number. So we did the cap thing, and she thought she could, and she didn't. And she was surprised about how she actually went way over it. So it was actually, the cap number was a savings to her in terms of that. And so there are ways to do that. It's not always you put in your mileage, you can just pay a flat rate. And so, but we don't know yet what we will do. And that's the key part, is we haven't figured that out yet. And so people asked me when we were starting these town halls, are you going to go and tell people what we're going to do? I was like, no, that is the whole point of the town halls, is to hear from folks what they think we should do in California and get consensus around how we're going to move forward. Because we all want, like the projects that Sergio talked about, we want those things. They're good things. They help improve our quality of life if we can get to where we need to go whenever we want to go there in a safe way. We all want that. but we do have to pay for that at some point, right? And the way we're paying for it, as Frank talked about in his presentation, is really inequitable. There are people who are living the farthest away in the least fuel efficient vehicle who are paying the most for our infrastructure. We're overburdening them, and the people who can afford to get a fuel efficient vehicle, people who can afford to work from home, are not paying into that infrastructure. So we're burdening the wrong group of people. All right, we're going to go up here and then over there.
Well, that was a good segue, because my question is about when we look at, the resources of the folks who are driving the less fuel efficient vehicles, usually based simply on age of the vehicle, and we look at either taxing or putting fees on EVs, what are the unintentional consequences that we're going to have? Are we going to have people who are going to either be abandoning newer technologies because they don't want to pay? Are we going to be abandoning what we want to be doing in terms of mass transit and trying to get people out of individual cars and onto buses? Like, how are we going to balance those things?
Thank you for that question. And that's the conversation we're having, is as he talked about each one, just the 4 options that he listed, there was a trade-off, whether it was hard to implement or it had some inequities inherited. And so that's the conversation that we're having now, is what are the trade-offs? And that's why I firmly believed it's going to be a multi-pronged approach, because we're going to have to make it so that it's not burdensome to one particular group. Like, instance, in Sacramento, we talk a lot about the gas tax, right? And how that impacts folks' life, and we should be repealing that. And worried about, if we move to a road user charge, we're basically double charging someone. And that's not the intention at all. It's you paying into the system the way you use it, and that's it. You don't get a charge on top of that. And that's why there's the conversation around the EVs. And when you look at EVs, I think it's about $100 to $200 difference. I'm going to get my numbers. Let me run over and get I don't want to give bad numbers. This is recorded forever. And then forever be like, Lori gave the wrong information when she had it on paper in front of her. And so when you look at where is that at? So, if you drive a gas powered or a hybrid car, you're going to pay a gas tax of about 61.2 cents per gallon. And so that means on average in a year, that's about $338, right? And so if you are an electric vehicle, you don't pay the gas tax, but all you pay is that flat, which somebody mentioned, $118. So that's a $220 difference each year. That, if someone can afford an EV, that $220 is not going to disincentivize them from getting an EV. There's something about the benefits of an EV. We like convenience. We like value-added things in our lives, right? And so that's what we're talking about. So you imagine all of those EVs paying just $220. What a boost to our transportation infrastructure system. That means the projects, that funding gap begins to close really quickly. And think about when I say EV, 118, that corporate person who has that EV that's delivering your good is also just paying that $118, right? They're not paying some extra amount in terms of that registration. And so it's just about having a fair and equitable system where everybody who's using the infrastructure and impacting the infrastructure is paying their fair share. And when people pay their fair share, it makes it easier for everyone. It makes it easier for that person who has to live really far and drive a less fuel efficient vehicle to not hit a pothole on the highway because there was enough money to do the maintenance, right? And so they don't now have to, have their car repaired at the same time, even though they're paying this much amount of gas. So that's how I look at it. Did that give you some information? That wasn't on mic, but somebody's claiming about taxing the rich. I'm not going to touch that. We got some hand claps in here. Oh no. That's going to be viral moment.
Sure. Hi, thank you. Yeah, my name's Bryce. I'm a local city council member. I don't think Tammy introduced herself as one of our supervisors. Hi, Tammy. Yeah. We had a BCAG board meeting earlier. Yeah, so my question is going to be on prioritization of the funds, but I just want to share real quick that I am really grateful for the transportation projects that are going on in the North State. I also have concerns about the prioritization of, which users are getting the benefits of those the most. So I'm also really glad we're looking at this potential for the road charge. I do feel like that's the most equitable way of doing this, but I'm glad to hear that you're also considering a combination of ways to fill this gap that's been left by the gas tax. So the comment I wanted to share about who's benefiting from our transportation funds is that I want to make sure that we're not just funding projects that most benefit vehicle drivers, but also active transportation users, transit riders, people who use rail or other forms of transportation. And locally, I've seen that there's kind of this perception that Caltrans does highway maintenance and then the city is responsible for everything else. But sometimes we see things like the Highway 32 project that runs right through our city. And while we're all grateful for the new pavement, I live one house down from 9th Street and we're apparently not getting a sidewalk where there's a sidewalk gap. And so there's some dissatisfaction locally with maybe how separately these funding sources are treated for active transportation versus highway projects. And if there's potential to change SHOP funds to be more flexible for what types of projects they fund, or to increase the amount that goes towards transit and walking and biking projects, those are things that I think our community could potentially get behind.
Agreed. Thank you for those comments. I do think the state has to look at how we fund active transportation and how critically important it is. And it's for me, it's rooted in thinking about back in the 50s. If you thought about what was a sign of upward mobility, upward economic mobility is whether you had a car or not, right? So I grew up in a poor west side of Fresno, right? And we used the bus for everything. And when I would go to the affluent side of my community, they had access to everything. They had quick access to an airplane. They had great sidewalks. They had, bicycle paths. They had, they can use their car. Now you think about affluent communities, they have Waymo and all these other options, And so when I think about what's a great sign of economic mobility today, it's really about the access to multi modes of transportation, right? Where you can get to where you want to go, however you want to go there. And how do we do that for every single neighborhood in California? And so how do we think about to make sure that when we have, especially I live in Sassoon City and we have Highway 12. And when I first moved to the city, 20 years ago, Highway 12 didn't have great sidewalks next to it, but it was our main street. It went through the whole town. And now through funding that came from the state, we have great sidewalks. So you can get either side of the highway. And now we're finally working on multiple ways to get across the highway because we still do it at grade crossing and it's not very safe. And so it's extremely important that we as a state think about how do we fund that. And so the wonderful thing about thinking about new funding opportunities is we get to think about new ways to spend them. Whereas some of our legacy projects, they have unmet needs. And so we got to fill that gap. But when we create a new funding source, then we get to be innovative and think about, well, how do we really fund a system that moves everybody where they get to go? We are car centric, but there are people who will never, ever be in a car in that way or drive a car. They're going to use our pedestrian walkways or bicycle paths or things of that nature. And so we just want to be able to have the kind of transport system that not only matches where we are in terms of our economy, but the future that we want to see with the end in sight. How do we want to move in and around our communities and then spend money in that way? And so thank you so much for those comments and thank you for prioritizing. Frank?
Yeah, I would just like to point out that this conversation in revenue declines is both highways and roads and a transit conversation as well. The Constitution and state statute primarily restricts the gasoline excise tax revenues to highways and roads maintenance, but the diesel sales tax is the state's primary mechanism for funding transit at the state and local level. We may see revenue declines quicker on the gasoline excise tax side just because we're seeing transitions there happen faster in zero-emission vehicles, but that technology is also coming to heavy-duty vehicles, which will impact the state's diesel sales tax. So it's a combination of all modes, because both are at risk of declining over the long run. They may happen at different periods of time, but they're both on the horizon.
Over here. So we'll go there and then over here.
My name's Addison Winslow. I'm also a council member of Chico. And I don't have a question that's substantially different from Councilmember Goldstein's question, but just want to piggyback on that to give you some experience that I have locally with the kind of funding that we get in. Maybe it's that the SB1 funding gets buried into some of these projects and we add other sources, but the ones that feel really substantial are, a lot of them come from the Housing and Community Development Department. So when you talk about reprioritization of funds, I think it's useful to consider. Like, we had an infill infrastructure grant for, it's a widening road on the end of town, and but it was justified by the fact that we had a lot of infill and affordable housing being produced out of that. And another is Regional Early Action Planning 2.0 grant that a much smaller sum, but it goes into a neighborhood that's incredibly disadvantaged. A bunch of low-income housing tucked up against the railroad track, and it's in one of the worst shapes anywhere in town. But the scoring for this that I think is useful to consider is it takes into account what kind of redevelopment we have or infill production that comes alongside it. Because when we talk about reprioritizing away from big new projects that we tend to get the grant revenue from towards maintenance of existing stuff, we run the risk of exacerbating the issues we have in producing infrastructure for new housing. And so we have this issue getting worse. And so if you want to riff more on thoughts in the legislature about reprioritization, because we tend to look at it as local governments that we don't get money for maintenance of projects. We get money for big new shiny projects. So we always imagine a new way that we can expand a road on the end of town and somehow justify that, even though it's tremendously more costly than it would be to maintain some of the things that actually would probably more positively impact people's lives within our community, because everybody's driving through these center city streets and old county roads that aren't being maintained.
I like that. Thank you. I didn't say it on mic, but I like that. That's good. That's how we got to think.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Ding Cheng. I'm a professor at Chico State, and also I'm with the California Pavement Preservation Center. First, I want to thank District 3, Sergio, for the Highway 32. I drive that almost every day in the past. There are a lot of potholes and high severity alligator cracking. So now it's really nice and smooth. So thank you for that. Talking about the revenue, has the state has a plan to get some cost revenue from taxi, rental cars, Uber. Those are using our roads. And in terms of cutting cost, in the North State, we don't have a high-speed rail, although I love it. Definitely we enjoy to have one. But at the current status, is the state thinking about, some of the funds goes to let high-speed rail can be saved for road projects. Thank you.
Thank you. If we take any money to high-speed rail, I would probably get kicked out of the legislature. I'm a high-speed rail fan. We have to find a way to fund that long-term, especially given the antagonistic relationship we have with the federal government on it. But these kind of resources will definitely have to go to maintenance, infrastructure, and all that, and not to high-speed rail. But we do need to have that conversation around high-speed rail, and we annually have a hearing about high-speed rail in my committee and Senate, in Transportation Committee, and we'll be having one in the first quarter, and talking about how do we then complete the project and expand the project to where it needs to go? Because it would be amazing to have high-speed rail up here. Thinking about the opportunity for being in the North State to get to San Diego, right? Or to get to Southern California would be pretty amazing, or even using it to get there to connect to Las Vegas, right? It'd be pretty amazing to have that project there. So I think high-speed rail is a wonderful thing. We got to figure it out. But this is more figuring out that infrastructure of other types of movement beyond high-speed rail, but also rail just in general, because we do have an amazing rail corridor outside of high-speed rail that people use. I use it. The Capitol corridor to get to the Capitol from where I live in Solano County. It's just 4 stops away. It's how I get to Sacramento probably 90% of the time. But I think High Speed Rail is an amazing project, but I don't think this particular funding would be suitable, to be able to fund that project. But we do have to figure that out. Back over here.
My name is Crystal Minolfi. I'm the Environmental Planning Director for WRA Consultants, an environmental consulting firm. And my transportation planner, who's watching this on live feed, sent me a text and said, "Can you ask this question?" He said, "Has the state considered establishing a statewide VMT mitigation bank as a mechanism to increase and better coordinate transportation funding, given that regional pilot programs have been implemented in places like Los Angeles? Are there plans to develop a similar pilot or program at the statewide level?"
I believe it's under consideration. I'm trying to remember. We are working on that. We did that at the end of, I'm gonna let Julia's like, "Oh my gosh, are you serious?" Julia is our associate consultant on transportation committee, and I will tell you this is her last couple of days of work. So I'm gonna make her work. She's moving to another amazing opportunity within the state. But here you go, Julia.
Thank you. It's an honor. Yeah, I know. I laugh at that question because we were working quite, or I guess I should look at the live stream. Yeah, we were working quite a lot on a VMT mitigation bank, and in last year's budget, the chair negotiated on a variety of things, one of which was a mitigation bank, through, the CEQA process instead of doing the normal 743. And now I think that your transportation planner understands 743 probably, so I won't go into it. But, instead of doing that normal process, instead a region or a project lead can pay into a statewide bank that's meant for affordable housing, specifically infill affordable housing. I think the administration would like it to be set up immediately, but it is going to take some time. Various guidelines, various agencies need to work on it. So unclear when, but I think a good model for a VMT mitigation bank, and hopefully the team up there doesn't scream, but is Western Riverside COG is also a really, they're doing some very proactive things on a VMT mitigation bank. So it's an interesting model, and we're working on it.
Thank you. All right, up here. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, this might be the easiest way. I'm learning. So one day when I'm like a talk show host, you guys will be able to say, "I was there when she figured out how to do it."
Andy Newsom with the Butte County Association of Governments, Executive Director. And one of the unique positions we have at BCAG is that we're the other of only two agencies of all the MPOs in the state that do both of the transportation planning funding and also administer public transit. So we've kind of always got this competing idea or philosophies of how do we really fund both. And I think, for us, what really comes down to is resources for both of those particular services are both declining. So, we used to really rely on the regional improvement program, our shares, to help with the locals do particular types of projects or help supplement funds that they wanted to do locally. Well, we really only see somewhere around $3 million every 2 years to the region, which this particular year is going to one project in Chico on Highway 99 for a roundabout, which it's a great project, but that's one, relatively small project that costs that much money for regional improvement funds. The other side of it are the reducing resources available for public transit. And we, aside from Chico, we are largely a rural public transit organization. And being able to supply fixed route service that works, paratransit dial-a-ride service that works, is extremely difficult. And we're actually right now in the process of kind of taking a step back and figuring out what do we need to do with the entire system so that it touches some more of the people in the communities that need services, particularly elderly, disabled, and those people live on roads that are in the county that have roads that are not chip sealed or are gravel and need to be graded. So one of the things that's really important to agencies like ours who have a lot of rural participants, jurisdictions, is do we have the ability to find the way to really invest in maintaining. So the word maintenance for us is a big deal. Being able to maintain the existing infrastructure, the Highway 32 project, maybe 15, 20 years ago, I'm not sure Caltrans was even willing to invest in that project. There was a point in time where I think it was going to be the city of Chico's job to take that project over, and the city said, well, we really don't want to take that over because it's so long and we really don't have the funds to do it. So I got to give a lot of credit to Caltrans for taking that under their wing and doing those investments on Highway 32. Highway 70, we're talking almost $1 billion on, a section of roadway that most other people in California don't know anything about, but it's really important to us. So what that really highlights for me is the expense needed to do all of this. And that relatively, I'm just going to say, it's almost an impossible task, really, to come up with a funding solution for 40 million people using an infrastructure that's been built to the extent that it was since the 50s. That's a really hard thing to do. So I really appreciate the balanced approach and looking at EVs to participate in helping to fund these things, because EVs are great, but they're heavy. And I have 5 electric buses that just doubled the amount that I pay for electricity on a 10-acre site. That's forcing me to have to look at some way to utilize the solar that we generate for the purpose of translating it into electricity consumption. So, the consumption of electricity is really expensive too. And so being able to come up with some type of a fair, equitable system that generates a little bit of fee off of the electric vehicle, however that happens, is pretty important, because the roads infrastructure doesn't really care whether it's an EV, a bus, doesn't really like the bus or the truck that much, right? But, cars, they're heavy too, and they do just as much damage. So I really appreciate this kind of balanced approach. And I think it feels like a suite of options. And then to the credit to the city of Chico, they stepped forward and put a local sales tax in place, of which they can generate some funds to do a lot of work. And it's paying off. There's a lot of construction. And I always like to say, when there's a lot of construction, as frustrating as it is, that's a good thing, because that means that the funds are being spent. So,
okay. Thank you for that. I want to echo something. I'll come back over that you said about our seniors and folks living in the rural communities and having not having great roads to get to. But if we don't fix those kind of things, that's the difference between them being independent, living in their home, to being in a skilled nursing facility, right? They have to have access to healthcare. They have to have access to people. And so if we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, then our seniors can't age with dignity. Sorry. Is it our senior planner back again, or you?
No, I was just curious. Okay. What is the timeline for implementing some kind of revenue stream for the funding shortfall?
Probably about 5 years ago, to be honest. So we are behind. We are very much behind. We're already seeing slight impacts we expect to see. I think it's 2 years from now. Is it 2030? What was the number where we expect to see decline? 3 or 4 years out, where we see the full decline. So that means, and if you think about how long it takes to implement something in California, right? We're talking right now, we have a session that ends in 9 months. Well, 10 months technically from now, but when we get back in January, it'll end in 9 months. If we did something in that year, it wouldn't go into effect till January. So this is doing something in the 2026 second half of the session. It wouldn't go into effect. It wouldn't be law till January 27. Then you have to implement it, which would take probably at least a year to 18 months if you were fast tracking it. So that means the first revenue you wouldn't get is probably till late 28, maybe 29. And then we're already in declining. And that's just one avenue. So we're behind. And we have to have the political will, right? But political will starts with community will, which is why this conversation is not happening in Sacramento, and it's happening in Chico. It's happening in Fresno. It's happening in the Bay Area. It's happening when we go down south. And our last one will be virtual, where anybody in the state can participate, because it starts there with community will to say, we want to see better, and demanding of their assembly members and their senators to say, let's be better, demanding of our governor, our current or our next, that we want better. And we have to solve this issue. So That's why I say 5 years ago.
I know I already had my turn, but first of all, no. First of all, Assemblywoman, thank you so much for coming up here. This is fantastic. You know, those of us north of Sacramento don't always get the opportunity to speak on things like this. So compliments to you. And then secondly, a question. Since COVID, I think there's been less people on the roads, maybe more people working from home. Is that causing issues too, as far as funds, gas funds, and I guess miles traveled? Is that an issue, or I mean, as far as revenue?
I don't think we've seen much dent in it, but I'll kick it to you, Keith. I know we have in transit, we've seen it. Quite a bit, that revenue drop, which means a greater reliance on what was the feds during the pandemic and the state to come up with that shortfall. But I don't know how much we've realized it in terms of.
Yeah, most of the studies are just on the just fuel efficiency and the EVs, but we do know the work transition to being more of a virtual workplace. We do know that's playing a role, but we don't really have pure or concrete data to how much of the decline is associated with that. But good point, though.
But that's something probably to look at and ask people to look at. We have access to some great researchers. We have our UC ITS, Institute of Transportation Services, doing research for the state. We just got them $5 million to do additional research, and so that might put that on the board to ask them about that. I'm looking at staff to help remind me to ask them of something to consider. Do we have any other questions? So I'll give a prompt real quick, and I think are we almost, I'm looking for time. Oh, I have a watch on. Oh, we are out of time. We are out of time. So I won't give the prompt. I was just going to ask of the different options, did anybody have any thoughts? But you all have been absolutely amazing. You really have. Give yourself a round of applause. Yes. I have loved this discussion, and what's been really cool about going to the different regions of the state is, we give a pretty consistent presentation, sans the local projects and things like that, but the discussion has been different every single time. Every single time the discussion is different. And so it just, feeds into the fact that California is such a diverse state. And that there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. We know one size fits one. There's one person that looks good in that one-size-fits-all t-shirt, right? Everybody else has to adjust. And so that's what I'm learning. I mean, I knew it, but it's being affirmed in me every place I go, is that we really have to tailor it. We really have to have multiple sizes to be able to address this issue and put lots of tools in the toolbox for our local electeds. Thank you so much for coming. It just reads to the fact that we have to give you the tools you need to be able to serve your community, because you really are on the front lines of the civic engagement. That was a big difference for me going from being a local leader, being a mayor in my town, to coming up to Sacramento. Is when you're a mayor, you serve and you represent where you serve, right? Right there, you're right there. You're at the grocery store, you're at the bank, you're talking to folks. But then in Sacramento, we leave. Right? Now I leave my community to go serve them well. And so I don't get to have those interactions as much as you all are having those interactions. So thank you for taking the time and sacrificing your own personal time to be able to be here tonight. I also want to give a few thank yous. Thank you to our panelists again and responding to the questions. Thank you, Chico State, for hosting us on your beautiful campus. We have a couple alumni in the house who are happy that we're here. To the Chico State students for their support, and the Chico Chamber of Commerce, to Butte County supervisors and the Association of Governments. We have some supervisors here, as well as our council members. Thank you so much for participating. Also, Assemblymember James Gallagher, his staff is here and helped make this possible. And so I thank him as my colleague, and also the town of Paradise. And I forgot to give them a shout out when we were in Watsonville, and I'll give them a shout out here. They've been with us each time. DCO has been amazing. That's our communications folks. They help make this happen. They help make this happen too with TV, and just our, my assembly consultant team. Even though she's leaving us to do bigger and better things in the state, she's still contributing. But that my team as chair, as well as Transportation California, who helped put these on. And so, just thank you all for all of your time, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. Thanks.